I think we should start. Good day, everyone. I s- yeah, good day, everyone. Morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. I see we've got people from all over the world. Nice of you to join us and to mention that in the chat. Please carry on doing that. It's good to see that we've got representation, I think, from all over the world, except probably for the Australia, New Zealand area where it's a horrible time of the night. And we don't blame them. So thank you very much for joining us. I am going to play a brief video and then we'll continue with the program. So yes, welcome again to the first of three master classes on the ICA white papers. As you can see, today we will deal with CPTED methodology with our president, Dr. Macarena Rao, and our ICA co-founder, Greg Seville. Then next week, Saturday, we will talk about our CPTED and artificial intelligence. And then after that, we'll talk about CPTED theory and praxis. So we really hope that you enjoy today's event and then join us for the next one as well. You'll see the dates there, and I hope that, again, I hope that you will be able to join us for the others. The masterclass is one of many programs and events that the ICA runs and in support of these initiatives, we support, well, these initiatives support crime prevention and creating safer spaces. Just a few administrative issues. Please make sure that your microphones and cameras are not activated. You, as we've done, please introduce yourself in the chat. And if during the course of the presentation you have questions or afterwards, please use the Q&A function. We will deactivate the chat function so that you have to use the Q&A function for questions or for comments, and you will be able to see others as well doing that. Right. My name is Tinus Kruger. I am the Executive Director of the ICA, and we really would like you to take advantage of the many opportunities that we offer by joining us. You can use the link that is provided on the screen now. If you're not a member yet, please join us. More information about our individual certification for CPTED professionals, the ICCP, is available on the website. As you can see there, the address, and the same with the individual certification for CPTED professionals, as well as the course accreditation program for course developers. That is also more information available on the web. Should you need more information, we are available on social media, but more than welcome to send an email that I will hopefully respond to as soon as possible. We just want to make you aware of this disclaimer on the screen, and particularly, we want to note that the views expressed in this presentation belong to our guest speakers and not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. We, as the ICA, we do not assume legal responsibility for the speaker's statements, the intellectual property, or the information presented today. Okay, let's begin with this masterclass. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you, our attendees, and our distinguished presenters, Dr. Macarena Rao, our president, and Greg Seville, the ICA co-founder. And then also our speaker and moderator, Dr. Manjari Kapoor, which is also our vice president And I will now ask her to continue and introduce Maka, and let's get the presentation started.
Thank you so much, Dennis, and a warm welcome to everybody from across the world, from a very warm India. Namaste, and I welcome you to the first in the series of Masterclasses 2026. We started this initiative late to October last year, and on popular demand, we are back with another interesting concept, which is white papers. And our speakers, I will also ask our speakers to enlighten our audiences about what exactly do we mean by white papers, what is the significance of white papers, why do we write white papers, and why we are hosting these master classes regarding white papers. There are a series of white papers written by a lot of our esteemed board members and some of the chapters. This is why we wanted to take this opportunity. I will also invite all of our viewers that if you are interested in a particular topic or you want to see more of on a particular subject, you want us to do master classes or webinars or whatever be it, please share your thoughts with me. I will be putting my email ID in the chat box, and I would love to hear from you. I would love feedback from all of you. We really look forward to hearing back from you. Unfortunately, we can't do that on these kind of fora, so I look forward to listening. So it's my great privilege to be introducing our ICA president now of 9 years. So very soon she'll be completing a decade as the president. She is, I don't think she requires really a major introduction, but yeah, we all know that she is an architect by qualification and with the doctorate in research. And she is also heading her own chapter in Chile and in Latin America. So without going much further, I would hand it over to her, but not before I introduce our co-founder of the ICA also, and a very, very eminent luminary in the field of CPTED. He's a criminologist and urban planner, and the a co-author of the forthcoming book Hope Rises. I don't know if it's already been released. Greg? Not yet. Okay. So about planning safer neighborhoods, and he currently runs an international consultancy firm from Denver, Colorado. Again, I don't think Greg really needs an introduction. And I will now, without standing in between you and the presentation, again, I'll just tell you, if during the presentation you come up with thoughts, come up with questions, keep posting them in the chat, and we will take them at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, and over to you, Maka.
Thank you, dear Manjari. And thank you, dear Tinus Kruger, also for all the hard work you have been doing in Backstage, all the ICA board members that are involved here today. Welcome, dear attendees. We are very honored and happy to have you here online. We have produced with Greg Saville a very brief context presentation that I will present as soon as I can, because today what we want to do is to discuss and to exchange information and feedback from you. Also, I want to highlight that I am so happy and honored to share stage with my colleague, friend, and mentor, Greg Saville. Really, I was involved in the CPTED universe because of Greg mostly, and other tutors, but mostly with Greg. So thank you for that. I will share my presentation. I will go through this presentation that we prepared together very quick, just to highlight some points for the later discussion. We developed the white paper on CPTED methodology the year 2023, together with Greg Saville, but also with the intense review process of the ICA board. I can say that the long period for this production of this white paper was 3 years. So it took us some time internally for discussions finally to launch this white paper. And everything started the year 2019 in the ICA conference that was held in Cancun, Mexico. That was so well organized by Dr. Mercedes Escudero, the ICA president for the Mexican chapter and ICA board. We had a very interesting and productive analyze time there in Cancun. And Greg had the idea that we should run this workshop with many people, attendees from the conference, just to discover if CPTED and discuss if CPTED was a set of principles only or a set of strategies for crime reduction through environmental design, or it was really a methodology. And we start doing this workshop. And with the results of the workshop, we start developing the first draft of the white paper. Something that rises in the workshop there in Cancun was that CPTED was a living methodology. We all know about that, but it was very clear from the outcomes of the workshop. And as you may know, CPTED has evolved from a first generation CPTED that we talk more about the physical security design and that aims to reduce opportunity of crime. Also, it has evolved to a second CPTED generation that is a jump from the first generation because it considers social cohesion and community participation and highlights social cohesion, community culture, connectivity, and threshold capacity. But also something that was interesting in the Cancun workshop was to highlight the third generation CPTED. Just I want to highlight here a very interesting article journal that was written by Greg Saville and Mateja Minjak. I saw Mateja in the chat, is here also. That highlights in a very academic way the relevance of understanding third generation CPTED from a sustainable and well-being point of view. If we talk about CPTED third generation, we will to think about well-designed safe places, viable and local communities, opportunities for personal growth and inclusive environment, sustained over long term. As Mateja and Greg highlights in the journal from CPTED third generation, I hope you all have read this journal because it's very relevant. They highlight in the journal the ecological, social, and economic pillar. They talk about the different dimension of these pillars. For example, when we talk about ecological, we talk about incorporating green infrastructure, natural elements in the CPTED projects also, and passive urban design. When we talk about social, we talk about social structures that are inclusive, equitable for neighbors. And when we talk about economy, we talk about also about to foster local economy, vitality. Don't forget that all these dates and the process, the 3-year process of this white paper was also in pandemic context. So it was interesting, the jump of thinking about that. On the other hand, I want to highlight that in the year 2021, the ISO CPTED standard 22341 was launched globally, and it set a benchmark in the CPTED history. I saw Paul van Sommeren, one of the leaders of the standards, and other colleagues are here also in the webinar. And it was very connected, this white paper on CPTED methodology with that standard. We did with Greg together this resume chart, very simple, just to highlight some of the accents. For example, the ISO CPTED standard regarding methodology is structured in risk assessment process, and the white paper on a systemic action research process. Regarding social focus, the ISO CPTED standard consider basic participation, and the white paper a core integration of social ecology. Regarding data input, the ISO CPTED standards talk about physical security risk analysis, and the white paper highlights robust mixed quantitative and qualitative data. And regarding the scope, we can say that the ISO CPTED standard has a scope on physical space safety, and the white paper a more direct scope on global liability and sustainability. So it's interesting to see how they balance each other, and they are very connected. Another aspect that the white paper highlights is the evidence-based approach aspect. It has to do with scientific applied methodology to CPTED interventions and research. And something that is central to all CPTED projects is that context matters. Context, it's very, very relevant from the white paper perspective. Rigorous CPTED avoids generic, copy-paste templates and prioritize. Action research, mixed data, and community co-design. That I think we all know that it's very relevant. The white paper highlights two methodological processes. The first one is the CPTED risk assessment model that considers small scale, medium scale, and large scale, but I will not go into deep here because Greg will explain it later in the Q&A section. And the second methodological process is the CPTED project cycle, something that the ISO CPTED standards put on the table in a very clear way. It's that CPTED, it's a process. It's a process of quality if we want to have the results we are waiting for. So, for example, in this process, we talk about 4 phases: diagnosis, co-design, master plan, and evaluation. When we talk about diagnosis, we consider qualitative and quantitative information. When we talk about co-design, we consider design process with the community. For example, participatory working modeling workshops. Just to highlight, in the last Palm Spring conference, we had many of these workshops in USA last year. When we talk about master plan, we are talking about the intervention after the diagnosis, participatory process, the co-design, and then a very clear and sustainable master plan. And when we talk about evaluation, we talk about process, result, and impact evaluation also. And regarding that, for example, I was very curious talking about artificial intelligence. What does Gemini think about the impact on safety from CPTED interventions? And I was very surprised to see these results. Gemini told me that regarding fear reduction, globally, I asked Gemini globally, the drop down of fear was 30 from 30 to 50%, and the reduction of crime was from 15 to 40%. So, and this is just to enter to the topic, but I myself, with Dr. Tim Pascoe, has conducted a longitudinal study in Latin American region of impact CPTED evaluation with very interesting decreasing results. As Greg mentioned, and as Dr. Manjari mentioned, all board members, ICA board members, they have interesting research. You can find many books written by all of the ICA board members. These are only some of them I use with Greg for the presentation. And just to highlight the main topics of this discussion today and this masterclass that we developed with Greg Saville. The first law of CPTED is that context matters most. Then the methodology does not mean CPTED strategies or principles. Methodology, from our perspective, is the research plan to figure out the local context based on a CPTED process, as ISO CPTED standard highlights. And third, if you are still doing only a walk-around inspection by yourself with a checklist, you have already fallen below the minimum standard of professional CPTED practice. The CPTED process, as we think, is much more. So I will leave that here, and I will start the conversation with Greg. I have one question, Greg, to you. But I think it's a very simple question.
I hope
So
you can
we
hear
can
me,
start.
Becca.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. Okay, great.
Why do you think, Greg, why isn't accepted checklist enough, Greg, in your perspective?
Well, okay. Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody. I see on the call there are people from Dublin and Vancouver and Netherlands, Florida and Boston. And one of the things being in this business so long is you get to visit all these places. So it's good to see people who are all friends and from places that I know. The question is important because why? I mean, why isn't the checklist enough? Well, first of all, what just happened about 30 seconds ago here in Denver is we had a massive power failure. That's why I'm on my phone now and not on my computer. And you can't. We didn't know that was going to happen. I mean, who knows? It's very hot today. Maybe the power system went out. Who knows? But you can't predict everything. And so CPTED checklists don't give you the picture. They don't give you the context. And the first rule of understanding how to do CPTED properly is understanding the context. You know, you can do a checklist, and checklist is what evolved after the 70s and 80s when we started, you know, when the books were written, when the early evaluation studies were done in the 70s with the Westinghouse studies on defensible space and that early work. And as people started to take the classes, as classes evolved in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, they said, you do CPTED. How do you do it? Well, you do a checklist. And they gave them a list. And the checklist was, you know, natural surveillance, good or bad, active control, good or bad. And a lot of people still do it. They do checklists on schools now because they're fast, they're quick. And they look reliable. They look like you know what's going to happen. Like I knew the power was going to last here in Denver till 5 minutes ago, and now it doesn't. And the checklist doesn't really. It's kind of a myth. It doesn't give you the full picture. It only gives you a small piece of it. So, for example, if in the checklist you have natural surveillance lighting, good or bad, you check good. You don't actually know whether the lighting for that context is what you want to achieve. In some cases, you know, sometimes gang areas run locations for drug deals. They may want the lighting on because it helps them deal drugs, you know, and that sounds kind of a silly example, but we've actually reduced crime by turning lights off in some places. The checklist would only tell you to turn it on or off. It wouldn't tell you that. So you don't get the context. It's basically the checklist is blind. And it doesn't really help you. You get the larger picture. It narrows your inspection to what is only on the page, and there's methodological reasons why it's a problem. But essentially, the checklist misses most of the important context. So that's why.
Connecting with the checklist, Greg, can we explain further in deeper the risk assessment model that I jumped when I was presenting? Because I know many experts of risk assessment that they use much a checklist, but probably it's not the only tool they use. Can you explain us more in deep the risk assessment model, please?
Right. Well, here in the U.S., after the 9/11 disasters, the government developed a risk assessment methodology. You may have seen it. It's like a chart matrix, and it has high risk and low risk and so forth. And it's a good sort of guideline, a picture guideline, but it really doesn't tell you how you get into the categories. There's no way to determine that's where I should be high, that's where I should be low. You just assume that somehow you would get, you know, intelligence information and this crime prevention CPTED information, and it was automatically fit on the chart. So that really didn't help us very much in terms of what we're doing. And when we started teaching the CPTED methodology in the 80s, what I discovered from many of the students was they just needed to know what do I do? How much research do I need to know? And you know, we say context is everything and context is what you need, but the question is, how much information do you need before you have the right context? Because you can research something forever, you may not have a lot of time. You know, when you're in the business of consulting, you have a client and a contract, you have to be done by next Friday. So we developed the risk matrix to say to the practitioners, here are the kinds of things you can do at different levels of risk. And so what we did was we divided the risk assessment methodology into two levels. On the top are the ideas of small scale projects and medium scale projects and large scale projects. We talk in the training and in online, you can see how that's defined. Usually small is within 50 meters and medium is 50 to 1,000, 2,000, and then large is a whole town project. And you categorize it geographically and spatially. And then the other dimension on the y-axis is time, because the SEPTED practitioner comes into a project. It could be before the project is built, like it's a development project that's going to be put into a new park. They're putting a new school in, and all you have is plans. In which case that the research for that is very different. It's not the same as it would be otherwise. Or it's after the fact, and that is you have something, which is what most SEPTED practitioners do, is they get called to a problem that already exists, or a scene where you have a problem with this. There's let's go with drug dealing again on the corridor, and it's after the fact. So you take those two dimensions, small, medium, and large, before and after, and you create what's called a matrix. And inside each cell of the matrix, there's categories of research, and and you'll see examples of this. If you want to read the writing, there's the in the white paper we quote the Tim Pascoe's paper with Loin Gammon. They published this matrix back then. Also, Randy Atlas's books on security and SEPTED, 21st century security. He has this matrix in there too, and it describes exactly when you do a small scale before the fact category 1 risk matrix. What research steps do you have to do? You have to do a site visit. You have to do you have to do interviews with the people. And when you get all the way up to category 5 and 6, what do you have to do? And there's obviously more things involved because the project's bigger. So the risk assessment matrix is a geographical way to look at, spatial way to look at it. What I like about this versus describing the one that you're going to talk about, Maka, is you have a really beautiful way to do it. Time it's a temporal thing. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. So it really helps the practitioner understand how much in terms of the space and how much in terms of the time. So that's what it is.
Yes, you are right. The timeline helps much. But also something that is very relevant is that we emphasize that this should be a process. What happens, for example, in your opinion, when we have a municipal team or a group of people applying a SEPTED strategy and they don't understand in a wider way that it's a process? They think that they are applying some principles only. What's happened then?
Well, look, too many people this is a sad problem. Too many people today think they're doing SEPTED by simply going to make some observations and then looking at it, write down some notes, and then boom, they go. The problem with that is it's not defensible. And in some countries like the US and Canada and some other countries abroad, people are being challenged. Developers are being challenged when there's crimes that occur in a place, and there's been a SEPTED strategy in place. The questions that comes up with people who have been victimized and who then take this to court later on and say you had an obligation to make sure this was safe. And then the first thing the courts will say, and the first thing the scientists will say is, what were your SEPTED strategies based on? How is it defensible? What tools did you have to prove that the lighting was the right thing to do? And if the practitioner says, well, I went there and I had a look at it, and they'll say, well, okay, but you're one practitioner. If I asked another practitioner, would they all say the same thing? And some people say, well, if they'll have the right training, they would, but that doesn't really cut it either, because everybody trains a little bit differently, and who knows what's right and wrong. I mean, so we needed some very clear specifics on what the methodology was, and the reason for that was what we needed to make it defensible. So the methodology helps make your strategies defensible later on.
Yes, totally right, based on evidence and in a very integrative way. Something that I like most from the white paper is that integrates in the diagnosis stage, for example, the qualitative data and the quantitative data. And this is something so relevant.
Yeah, because what happens is you tend to say, let's look at crime statistics. And, I mean, you need to know that crime statistics are some of our least reliable data sources. I mean, if you want to know about crime statistics, there's a really great book by a criminologist named Martin Anderson. He's out of Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. And he wrote a book years ago called The Science of Crime Measurement. And he talks in that book about, the limitations of crime statistics. I mean, they only tell you this much. Many people don't report them. There's something called the ambient sort of population, which is people may be there in the daytime but not there in the nighttime. How do you determine risk if that's the case? So the crime statistics are very, very limited in how we do that. So by adding many other methods, because the methodology is actually the research plan, but the methods are the things you do. So by adding things like a survey, an interview, a site visit, crime statistics, by all together, you add them. What happens is research methodologists call this triangulation, and you get more and more data. And what happens is the picture gets, if you have a camera lens, the picture may be very blurry when you first get there, but as you add the methods, it starts to get more and more clear, like the camera lens is starting to focus. So that's how I describe it. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And I connect that with some work I'm doing with a municipal team here in Chile. I'm working in Las Condes. I know that they are connected also. And we are developing with some geographers team fear maps. I don't know if you have developed some fear map.
Oh,
And we cross that and we analyze the fear mapping with crime patterns. And it's so interesting to see how the subjective world and the qualitative data is linked also with the quantitative data. So it's interesting. And the white paper
and sometimes how it isn't linked.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting.
Sometimes it's the opposite.
Yeah, sometimes the spatial pattern of fear not always is the same as crime. Sometimes the spatial pattern has to do with behavior, but total daily behavior, not to do with crime opportunities. So it's interesting, very interesting.
Right.
So if you can explain more, Greg, I think about the ICCP program. I think it's a good opportunity because you mentioned that not always the CPTED training is the same all around the world, but ICA has the intention to have a minimum quality standard, or that's the ICCP program.
Yeah, the ICA's CPTED certification program, ICCP, that's been running for about 15 years. It's currently run by Matea Mhinyac in the ICA. It also took 3 years to develop that program. When we started, we had many of the world experts who were doing a lot of CPTED back in the 15 or 20 years ago, got together over a period of years, and we surveyed and did research to find out exactly what our minimum standards, what do minimum standards even look like. And so we came up with what are called competencies. And we have just to make an announcement here, we're going to be running the next CPTED conferences in Calgary, October 4th in Canada this year. And there's going to be a training session at that by Matea on the certification process and at that session. So if you come to the conference, you can get a bit of exposure to how that actually works. But basically, the certification program has competencies, like 11 competencies, and things that we identified that CPTED practitioners need to know. They need to know, obviously, they need to know content knowledge. People get confused that maybe is it just the content knowledge? They need to know about first generation CPTED. Do they need to know about many methods of access control? Well, they need to know that, but that's not a competency. That's a skill that gets applied as a competency. So there's a difference there, and this is a competency-based program. So in the competencies, there's things like the ability to work in a team to get projects done, the ability to write a CPTED report. Those are competencies. And two of the competencies, I'll just pull them up here today so I remember the titles. One is competency number 3, which is called undertake research in a nominated environment, and that requires knowledge of a CPTED methodology, because that's when you first get there. You're trying to get a sense of, what do I have here? That's when you're determining how big is the project. Is it really, really serious and I had to do more research or less research? Is it large geographically or small geographically? And you kind of figure out what category it is. So you determine that, which then tells you what do you need to do? I need to collect crime statistics. I need to do some interviews. Do I need to do a survey? Survey and interviews are very different things. A statistically significant survey means you have to do hundreds of surveys. So that could take you weeks. Well, a client's not going to wait for you to do that if it's a small project. So the scoping, that competency number 3, is the process where you bring the methodology knowledge into the competency and say, I have this knowledge to know what to do. And then the other competency that covers this is competency number 7, which is analyzing and assessing local conditions. And that's when you're actually applying the method and saying, we have 18 interviews, and here is what the interview told us, and we used to use qualitative data analysis, qualitative research tools, which were online. Today, a lot of folks are using artificial intelligence. They're going straight to, to chat or to OpenAI or to Claude or what have you, and asking it to do it. Now, you have to be careful with the AI. We're going to talk about this next week when we talk about CPTED and artificial intelligence. You have to be careful with that because AI is a super powerful tool, but also has a lot of limitations. But we'll talk about that next week. But essentially, that competency 7 is how you actually use the methods and the methodology. So both of those are covered in the certification program, and knowledge about methodology is critically important.
Totally agree with you, Greg. And for us, it's very, very useful. For the training process that we are doing, at least in the Hispanic region, Spain also include, and all the Latin American region, the CPTED project cycle is very useful because students, they know that they need to gather the information from diagnosis, then they need to define the problem that they will take care, then they have to co-design the strategy, implement, and evaluate. We have some questions in the Q&A chat. Do you want to proceed with the questions, Greg? I don't know if Manjari,
I think so. I mean,
yes, I am there, so I can take the first question. Either of you can answer. So this is from Karen Feinberg. She asks, how does a practitioner take in elements of sound in the mix? So I guess when she says mix, it must be in the context that we were talking about. So.
Well, I mean, I could start, Maka, if you don't mind, and tell you that when we look at CPTED methodology, if it should always have a site visit component to it, and certainly in the site visits we do, we have 3 elements of observation, and we use all the senses. So we don't just use a visibility to look at the lighting levels, to look at the the distances, the viscosity of fences to see how clear you can see through them, or the color rendition and certain lighting styles. We use more than visibility. We also use auditory, the sense of a sound, and olfactory, the sense of smell, because whatever affects the human senses affects perceptions of fear. So with sound, especially in some of the surveys we do, when we've done qualitative surveys, fear surveys, we have Matea has developed this digital app to collect perception ideas geographically by having folks with their phones, and they record their observations when they do that. One of the things you listen for is what does it sound like, and what we discover is as sound levels go up, particularly around roadways, fear levels go up, and because you can't hear people speak, and if you yell for help, nobody can hear you. And it's the same thing with smell. If you're in alleyways, the sense of smell can be overpowering and you focus only on the smell and not what's going on around you. So that's a great question, Maka. Maka, what's your sense of that whole area of human senses?
Yes, very good point, Karen. Also, in my experience applying CPTED in the LATAM region, the most of the time, sound is very crucial for safety perception. For example, we have worked much with women. Because of that, I also wrote some years ago the CPTED Guide for Women, because we developed a very special focus projects for women, homicide against women in Mexico and also in Chile. And women say that they fear much in public space because they are dogs, for example, and they are very brave. And we discovered that it's not only crime that makes people feel fear, especially if they are elderly. So the sound perception is very crucial for quality of life, for liability, and for the perception of safety in a city. So I think it's a very, very relevant question. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'll move on to the next question. Yes, Greg, you want to say something?
I was just going to say one thing that Mackie might want to add to that is I described the risk assessment matrix, but we didn't hear you describe the CPTED project cycle and how that fits into this whole story about methodology and some of the questions that like Karen just asked. Could you give us a sense of what is the CPTED project cycle? How does that work?
It works as a timeline, as you mentioned, and what we do in the diagnosis stage, we apply quantitative and qualitative instruments to gather information from the environment, the communities, and the behavior in the environment, the desirable behavior of the neighbors, for example, but the not desirable also if we have information about incivilities, for example, violence and crimes that occur in that neighborhood. And we gather all the information, we produce the diagnosis, then with a participatory process. For example, one of the tools of diagnosis that we apply is the cloud of dream, mostly with children. We try to involve different ages and different groups of the community in the diagnosis to have a very accurate picture of what is happening there. And with the cloud of dream, the children draw their dreams of the environment, and the most of the time they project subjective information and give us information about violent behavior. For example, it is very different if you ask a child, are you abused, sexual abuse? It's very different to ask directly than to ask a child, please, can you draw your dream school? And probably if they are being part of violent behavior and they have a trauma, they will draw the trauma. So we use this kind of tools, qualitative and quantitative tools to gather information. And then we do a participatory process to get a proposal, a master plan design, and then we implement, and then we try to evaluate. It's not easy, Greg. I want to be very honest. In my region, it's not easy to make awareness about the relevance of evaluation. Sometimes mayors or governors don't have time to do that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's everywhere. I mean, and also project leaders and clients who want to do hire a SEPTA practitioner, they don't want to spend the money. They don't want. It's like, yeah, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Which is one of the things I like about your project cycle is that it helps the SEPTA practitioner know how much to collect, and also maybe you want to talk a bit about the idea of how do you know when a CPTED methodology has been successful? The idea of the baseline, because we haven't talked about baselines yet.
Oh, that's super relevant. Super relevant. When we produce the baseline, quantitative information and qualitative information are needed. For example, if we apply a survey of fear perception, then when we finalize the project, we apply the survey again to the same sample, the same universe. And then we can compare before and after results. But also we have done impact evaluation, and that's more difficult involving academies team. I think this has been very challenging, but also very needed for decision makers to make those urban and safety decisions based on evidence.
Thank
Okay,
you.
cool.
There are a lot of questions in the waiting. Can I move on to the next one?
Please.
Yes, please.
Okay, so there's another one from Marco Perez. It's a very interesting question. It says, how do we balance between fear mapping and crime data to ensure we address the main issue in a space?
Go, Greg, please.
Well, by following the methodology and figuring out, like this matrix, figuring out which category of research you are, how much information you're collecting. By the time you start to collect the surveys, by the time you start to do the interviews, when you start to look at the crime statistics, what's happening is the picture is getting clearer and clearer and clearer. Now, it may never be perfect. You may never get exactly perfect on everything, but you don't need to be perfect. You just need to get as close as you can get it. There's no such thing as a social science perfect methodology that captures everything. There's always going to be some intuition. There's going to be experience. And so forth. But that's a great question, because sometimes the issue actually is fear. We've done research on many areas, and they've said we have this area with crime, and we look at it, and they don't have the issue of crime. There's never been a report of crime, and even when we do victim surveys and we ask the experiences of being victimized, they don't report it. And what we discover is actually the problem is actually fear itself. So, what about you, Maka? How do you answer that?
Oh, I like very much your comment, Greg, because I was thinking on our fear map in Las Condes in Chile, and we had a methodological challenge because we get the response mostly from elderlies. So other experts from the municipality say us that the sample is not representative because the most of the answers are being from the elderly. So we don't have the fear map of the young people, for example, or the adults. But I agree with you. We don't need to have the perfect methodology. Just we need to start. And this is what we decided in Las Condes finally, is just to start with the elderly fear of map. And this is enough. Then when we have a better understanding of the phenomena, then we can add other ages. So I totally agree with you that
Right.
there is no perfect methodology, but at least we need to go as near as we can from the phenomena.
Thank you,
Right.
Mecca and Greg. I hope Marco got his answer from that. Moving on to the next question. This is from Omar Ramadan. He says, I live in a country that has multiple nationalities from different regions of the whole world, which creates a challenge when I'm designing a security plan. Is there something that CPTED methodology takes into consideration when addressing psychological approach of different individuals towards different physical elements?
Maka,
Who
why
would
don't
like
you
to
take
take
that?
that?
Maka, why don't you go?
Yes, super. Well, I think the evolution of septet first, second, and third generation, it's a very integrative evolution. So it's mostly the last generation of septet is very human-based, and it considers diversity as a value. So all the tools we are discussing here, for example, the Cloud of Dream or the apps developed by Mateja for mapping or gathering information, and all the information that you can get from a well-done septet diagnosis that considers first, second, and third generation will open doors for diversity. Of course, because we need to value that diversity for a very strategic and well-applied and later septet intervention. So you have all in the methodology, you have the tools, and in the third generations to gather that diversity from the field. This is my opinion.
Thank you, Mecca. Another question from Gaston Marchand. I think maybe Greg would like to take this. Can third generation septet variables be mapped as the explanatory bridge between fear maps and crime data, particularly where perception and incidence diverge? Did you get that, or you want
Well,
me to
okay.
repeat it?
So, well, let me start answering and see if and then we'll ask if it's clear enough. The purpose of third generation septet was to go back to what C. Ray Jeffrey wrote about when he originally wrote the first book on septet, and when he came to our third conference, and he said this very clearly. He said the septet theories that I developed were not the same as defensible space. They're different. He said defensible space, which became first generation septet, has a different orientation. And it never talked about things like diversity. It did very little of that, but different languages, and didn't talk about any of that. As we've added to that story, and by the way, there are some instructors who say if you teach first generation well, then it covers everything, and that's nonsense. That's not what happens at all, because different instructors teach differently. And if you're going to be scientific about your methodology, you have to lay out the steps so that everybody has the same baseline to work with. So second and third generation were attempts to expand that, to go back to our roots in some way, theoretical roots, but also to say, here's new research on that. And third generation septet basically says that we are focused on sustainability of areas, that if first generation septet looks at the physical space around us, and second generation septet focuses on the relationships between people inside our circle. Third generation septet goes back into how the brain works, how we perceive, and that when you get into perception, you talk about things like in environmental architecture, they call this thing called biophilia, which is how the effect of greenery and sounds affect your sense of well-being and so forth. And so third generation specifically looks to the current research on that. It brings that research into it. But I will tell you that third generation septet only evolved in 2019, 2020, and that's only 7 years ago. In a development and evolution of a new theory, that's very new, and it's still being developed. So a lot of these questions haven't been answered yet. Maka, do you have any thoughts on that?
A very good question, Gaston. By the way, I work with Gaston in Chile doing all the fear maps work. Very good question, Gaston. I think it's a news underdeveloped, really, as Greg mentioned, because we don't know much about fear patterns in spatial layout. Sometimes it can have, for example, a correlation with thieves, with rapes or homicide. In some maps, we can see spatial correlations in Chile, but in Mexico, probably it will not a spatial correlation. So we don't know really. My main idea is that we need to produce more fear evidence and map more fear. I think we don't know much at this stage, and it's a brand new universe that we can explore in a scientific way.
Yeah, Maka, one thought that I could add to that is in the early years of CPTED, when lighting became the big factor, and a lot of courses teach lighting, how much lighting and lux levels and foot candles and all this stuff, they try to get very quantitative. But what we learned early on is when we started to survey, particularly women, and how women respond to nighttime environments and how men respond to nighttime environments are very different. And gender has a powerful role there. And one of the factors we discovered was the lighting color itself, the actual type of ballast, whether it was sodium gas and a sodium light, or halogen gas and a halide light, or now LED. Each one of those has what's called a different color rendition index, or CRI. And the CRIs have an impact on perception and fear. We don't, even today, when I look at some of the crime science articles in the journal, and they talk about the latest lighting research, they always talk about lighting levels and quantity. They never talk about quality of light. So we have no research on very little research on this, and we need to, well, my power just came back on, oh yay. And so we need much more research on this. And we have a CPTED journal on the EPA, and this is where we're going to publish that. So if you have any research, please send it in.
Yes, an invitation. Please support the ICA journal, that it's becoming bigger and bigger with better articles.
Thank you, both of you. Maybe the last or the second last question. From Terence Love, there are two parts to it. He's given it in two parts, so I'll tell you both in one go. So he says, this is from Terence Love, Dr. Terence Love from Australia, and he's up really late in the night, I must say, for this masterclass. How do you include
thank you.
How do you include hard to access groups in a community, as they are often those who most need CPTED support? There are specialist youth workers who are experts in connecting with hard to access young people, and it's an important aspect of CPTED but very difficult. I'll tell you the follow up question, I think it's related. Would it be better to deliberately gather the information about context from those who are most difficult to access first, zero, I don't know, and then those that are easiest last, the elderly, etc., to avoid CPTED being used as a tool of inequity?
Good question, Terence. Thank you for being awake and being connected. In my experience, each case is different. We have the timeline of the CPTED project cycle, but in some cases, for example, in Patagonia, I developed a CPTED project that was shown in the WOOF International Congress from United Nations this year. But for many years, I worked in Patagonia, and we had challenges with young people. They didn't want to participate. They don't feel represented by the project. So what we did was many cultural activities to attract them. And in a soccer field, it was different to ask to talk with us in a school, for example, than in a soccer field, where they feel more comfortable, they feel at home. And so we discovered that if you want to gather information from these kind of groups that are challenging, you need to understand how they think, what moved them. The music, for example, if we produce a musical festival, probably, and then we can talk with them and get information from drug abuse, for example, or drug trafficking or drug consume. It would be different if there is a music and there is something that make them feel more comfortable than if we go to the home and we ask them directly. So we discovered that, and we use the cloud of dream that we use with children with them, but then we coordinate with the mayor and we use in that soccer field a very big like scenario where they can do muralism using different sprays, like a graffiti, but in a mural form. So my final thought is that we need to think and understand what attracts them, and then to try to connect with them and get the information that we are looking for.
Thank you for that answer, Mecca. I hope, Terry, your question is answered. Uh, a quick answers to last two questions. I expect them to be brief. Greg, this question is to you from Percival. He says, Gregory, what are your thoughts on applying design thinking strategies to CPTED projects?
Sorry, design strategies.
Design thinking strategies to CPTED projects.
Well, I mean, I I did some work in New Zealand years ago, and the architecture groups there have a design methodology they use for their architectural sort of work, and they kept using that methodology for their work, and it was fine. It's a good strategy, but you got to remember in urban design training and a lot of architecture training doesn't teach much about crime. And even today in most schools, I know schools here that have people who have criminology departments next to urban design and architecture departments. They barely talk to each other. So I think what needs to happen is the methodology and the research on the site. And by the way, we use neighborhoods, one of our geographical limitations to it, because you can't survey. If you're going to do a survey issues on a school, you want to collect data surround the school, the adjacent land uses and impacts from the neighborhood. But if you start to extend it to neighborhoods across town, then it just gets too unwieldy. So we use neighborhood geographies to limit our research. And then also we do when you have the research and you look at the problem, the research methodology, if it's well chosen, will give you information right away. That will start to determine what design elements need to go into it. Because a lot of times we find we don't use design at all. Sometimes design is one of the last things we do. In second generation CPTED, it may not be design that solves the problem at all. And so early CPTED, first generation CPTED, and the language of CPTED, why generations language is so important, is because it tells you that it's a spectrum. The CPTED is a spectrum now. It's not simply a small, narrow piece of the early first generation design out crime story. And so I really agreed with the design out crime idea, because sometimes you can't design out crime. I mean, or if you can make it a fortress to the point where it's unlivable, and we're not just making places safe, we're also making them livable. And I know Tinnis is here. He and I had a conversation about what livability means, which is another whole discussion. But I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure I got the understanding of it clearly, but does that make sense, Manjari, do you think?
Yes, yes, it does absolutely, Greg.
Okay.
And I think if Percival has any counter questions, he can write to you. He
Okay.
already knows the channels very, very well. Now, we've already exceeded time, so I'll just sneak in one last question because I expect the answer to be very, very short, probably in a single line. So I'll take that in. It's Fasto Aguilera. He says, I'm reading out. He's new to methodology out of necessity because of increasing crime in Ecuador. I live in Quito, and though it's not the center of drug trafficking crime related problems, common crime is a problem. From a neighborhood leadership perspective, what is the best theoretical, practical approach? I don't know, theoretical or practical approach to deter crime. If I was to answer this question, I would say septed, as simply stated as that. But
Yeah.
I'll leave the answer to both of you to answer as you choose.
Maka?
Just to mention very quick, I did a accepted workshop 3 weeks ago in Guayaquil, Fausto, in Ecuador. So we gathered much information. We were 30 persons doing the charrettes, the accepted workshops on the field, working with communities. So I will be happy to share the experience and information with you. I think CPTED can be applied in Ecuador with much success. Especially after we did that with the workshop. So please write me president.cpted.net. That's my mail, and we stay in contact.
The only thing I would add to that is there's a Brazilian sociologist years ago named Paulo Freire, and he wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And one of the things he said in that book was he said, if you're going to make change, you need to make it with the people involved and affected most by the change. And Maca, the term Maca uses native intelligence. And so I think if you do CPTED, I used to be the CPTED expert comes in and does it for you or does it to you. In Safe Growth, we've moved our methodology here is called Safe Growth. It's a neighborhood planning system. In the Safe Growth methodology, our philosophy is not to or for. If we have to, we will, but to do it with. So my strategy is to say, what neighborhoods are you talking about? Who lives in the neighborhoods? What kinds of tools do you have to bring those people to the table, sit them down, and then help teach them CPTED so they can do work with themselves. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mecca. At this point now, I would thank both our esteemed panelists and all the viewers watching us either too early, too late, or at a convenient time. Thank you for joining us. And be with us, please, next week, same time. We'll have the second part of the masterclass next week. Somebody has asked this question in the chat block box, and I'm answering that it's the same time. You will find the registration links either in your mail soon after or on the website. So over to you, Tinus. Back to you. Please do the closing part.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much. This was a lively discussion. It's a pity we can't spend more time, but you're more than welcome to send us your questions and have further discussions, especially with Greg and Maka. But yes, as you've mentioned, Greg, some of these issues we've discussed, and I think there's a lot that one can say about many of these things, and it's a pity that we don't have more time. However, if you want much more time, come to this conference, which if you want to say a little bit more, Greg, you're more than welcome, but the information is there. I don't know if you want to add something.
It's going to be a great conference. We've got lots of hands-on training. We've got walkabouts into neighborhoods. We have the first neighborhood that's been built from scratch up that was designed with second generation CPTED in mind. And one of the people who did that will be on the tour with us, Anna Broussard. And the conference hotel is right smack dab in the middle. So you get to see what this looks like 20 years later. So lots of exciting things, CPTED training on certification and lots of amazing people. So please come and register. We'd love to see you.
Great. Thanks very much. And then please, once we've done this with this webinar, this will be available for you. Please fill in the survey and tell us what you thought so that we can improve if needed for our next webinars and our next master classes. And with that, thank you very much.